Okay, more. We were at the bottom of Nun Beis on the Beis, and the last thing we discussed yesterday is how would it be relevant to be Mekadosh and Isha in the Azara? Women don't come into the Azara. That's not the norm, the way Toshus learns. The way Rashi learns, they're not allowed to come into the Azara. So Rabbi Yosy, being that there was a deadlock, Rabbi Meir refused to address the concerns of Sumchus, who was a Talmud of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yosy said, Torah Allah, so he explained that it's very relevant. Even if a woman is not on the Azara, she could have been a shliach to be Mekabel Kiddushin for her. Her father might be being Mekabel Kiddushin for her if she's a Ketana, or maybe she pushed her way in. And that was the hechetimsa of how our Mishnah's case would be with the Kiddushin B'Kotche. So let's now get down to the actual halachas discussed in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says, "I'm a kalish bechelkoi." So this is with the basar kachim, bein kachim, bein kachim kalam, eina mikudeshes. The ma'aser sheni. So that's with the meat. Ma'aser sheni. This would be with the actual pairs or with kesef ma'aser sheni. Bein shogi bein mezid loy kiddush. So that would be clear of Meir. That would be because clearly Reb Meir holds ma'aser sheni is not owned by the person; it's owned by the Rebbeinu Shalom. And Rabbi Yehuda b'shogeg loy kiddush b'mezid kiddush. So for the fact that Rabbi Yehuda says that b'mezid kiddush, it must mean that you do own the money of the ma'aser sheni. So then we need to understand, so why b'shogeg loy kiddush? It's his money. We'll have to figure that out. The Gemara is going to discuss that. Ubehektish, it's exactly the opposite. B'mezid kiddush b'shogeg loy kiddush. There we're going to have to figure out why as well. The Reb Meir, Rabbi Yehuda b'shogeg kiddush b'mezid loy kiddush. So you could see that Rabbi Yehuda has the opposite approach by Kachim as he has by Ma'aser Sheni. Now here Uve Hektish is no longer speaking about Bechelkoi with meat. Here Hektish means with money of Hektish. And the question of Me'ilah is what we're going to discuss. So let's have a look at the Gemara. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mikudeshes. And we're talking about our machlokes. We're talking about our machlokes of using kachim. Rabbi Yosy Omer Eina Mikudeshes. Omer Rabbi Yochanan Ushneim Mikra Echador. They both learned their halacha from the same pasuk. The question merely is how they interpret the pasuk. It says in the pasuk. Let's have a look inside. Ze yilecha mikodesh hakadoshim mino eish kol karbanim. So here we're speaking about the very first case of the Mishnah of mekadosh bechalkoi. You're being mekadosh with a chelik of meat that you got, or that a kohen received, or that Yisrael received from the korban. V'zeh yilecha mikodesh hakadoshim mino eish kol karbanim l'chol menchasam u'l'chol chatasam u'l'chol hashamam asher yoshivu li kodesh kodeshim l'chahu u'levanach. So this is the pasuk that we're going to be dashed. Zok the heilige Gemara. Shnei mekarei chadorshim. V'zeh yilach mikodesh hakodeshim min ha'eish. Rabbi Yehuda savar l'cha l'chol tzorchecha. It's given to you to do whatever you want to do with it, including Zok Rashi afilu l'kadosh ba'isha. And therefore, it would be a good Kiddushin if you're Mekadosh Bechelkoi. Okay, Gewaltig. Rabbi Yosy Savar Keish. It's like Eish. In other words, the chelek that you get is just like the chelek that we burn. It's just like the chelek that goes on the Mizbeach. Ma'eish lachiva. Just like the chelek that goes on the Mizbeach is only for the achilas HaMizbeach. Afunami lachila. So too the chelik that's given to the person is also only given to him to eat, but for nothing else, not to use to be mekadosh and eat. Nimnu v'gamru. After we had this machlokes between Rabbi Yosy, who does not allow him to use it for Kiddushin, and Rabbi Yehuda, who will allow him to use it for Kiddushin, they had a minyan in Bezdin to decide what should the psak be. Nimnu v'gamru amakadosh bechelkoi bein kachim kodeshim bein kachim kalam loy kiddush. That was the consensus. They had a sit down and they saw what the Roy was, and then the Pesach halacha was everybody agreed like Kiddush. Rav said no. There is still a machlokes. There was never such a consensus where everybody agreed. Rabbi Yehuda still maintains that Hamakadosh B'Chalkoi will work because it says L'cha L'chol Trachecha. It's more mistaber to say that eventually they had a discussion and Rabbi Yehuda agreed to Rabbi Yosy that you cannot be Mekadosh with Kachim. How do I know it? From a long brisa. Let's look at this long brisa. The Tanya we learned. Minayin she'ein cholkin menachos keneged tzvach. How do you know that, let's say there's one kohen who likes carbs and there's another kohen who likes proteins. So the one kohen can tell the other kohen, you know what? You give me all of your menachos, any chelik of mincha that you have, give to me. I like carbs and I don't want to eat fat. I don't want to eat red meat. All the meat that I get as my chelik, I'll give to you. How do you know you cannot do that? Talmud loymar v'chol mincha asher te'afa b'tanur. Let's see this pasuk because we're going to be darshaning almost every word of it. V'chol mincha asher te'afa b'tanur. A. B. V'chol natza b'marcheshes. And any mincha that's made in a deep pan, so it's a softer dough. V'al machvas, or if it's made in a flat pan where it would be a more cracker-like dough. La koyin ha-makrib oisa, the koyin who's makribit lo siya, that's who it should belong. So Zok to Gemara, Dr. Bryce to dash this post. V'chol mincha asher te'afa b'tanur l'chol b'nei Aaron tiyeh. Yochol lo yechelku menachos. Oh, so that's how you know. That's how you know that you can't swap, because it says l'chol b'nei Aaron tiyeh. It has to be to all of the b'nei Aaron. And all of the Bnei Aharon. So actually, I didn't continue on the next pasuk. So these are two consecutive psukim, and at the end of the second pasuk, referring back to everything in the pasuk, it says l'chol b'nei Aharon tiyah, which means every carbon, every mincha has to go to every kohen. So I can't swap my share for something else. Rather, every bit of the mincha has to go to every kohen. L'chol b'nei Aaron tiyah. So Zok to Gemara, that's talking about a mincha. Yochel lo yechelu menachos keneged zvachim. I can't swap mincha for zvachim because the mincha, every kohen has to have a chelik. What would be the svar of that? Shelekamu tachteihem b'dalos, because you never find that. You don't always find that when there's a poor person bringing the carbon, he can bring a mincha instead of a behem. Although maybe yachlu menachos keneged oifos sherekamu tachteihem b'dalos. By oifos, whenever there's a chiyuv to bring oifos, if he's very poor and he can't even afford an oif, the pasuk says ve'vi es karbanei asher chata asir sha'efa, like by the oil of the yored. So maybe I could split it. One coin could say, you take all my birds and I'll take all your carbohydrates. Zok to Gemara, Talmud Lomer, v'chol natza b'marcheshes l'chol b'nei Aaron tiyah. So if you see what's going on over here, at the end of the pasuk it says l'chol b'nei Aaron tiyah. That's telling you that every coin has to have a chelik in every mincha, but it lists off specifically every type of mincha. Te'afa b'tanur, marcheshes, machvas, v'lulu b'shemen, chareva. So all of these are extra words, extra menachos. Just list off the whole mincha. Why list off each individual mincha by name? Because we're going to be marbin more and more things that are dictated by the Torah that have to be l'chol b'nei Aaron, and you can't change your chelik in one thing for someone else's chelik in another. So it says l'chol nasa b'mechashish l'chol b'nei Aaron to tell you even menachos keneged oifos. Yochel lo yechel menachos keneged oifos. Shalolu minei damim. Oifos is a carbon that you're makriv dam on the mizbeach. V'alolu minei k'mocha. And a mincha is a different type of carbon. It's with flour. But maybe I will yechel oifos keneged zvachim. Shalolu v'alolu minei damim. Maybe if I have birds and I don't want them, and you have meat, I can say, I'll give you my birds and you give you my meat. Talmud Loimer, al machvas. Again, al machvas is talking about a mincha. It's not talking about zvachim or oifos, but since it's extra, we're darshaning to apply the same principle that every coin has to have a chelik of every part of the mincha. We're applying it to the oifos and the zvachim as Why? Shalolum I say in biyad. The oif is done biyad. Your malika is done biyad. V'alolum I say mechli. But the behemoth is processed with a knife. It's processed with a keli, not mamish by hand. Avo maybe yachlaku menachos connected menachos. Shalolum v'alolum I say in biyad. Maybe if you had this type of mincha and I had that type of mincha, and I like the cracker, you like the softo, so I'll say I'll give you my cracker, you give me your softo. Every single mincha has to go to every single claim. And therefore, you're not allowed to swap, I'll give you mine if you give me yours. Why shazum, same rakim, same costume, a different type of mincha, we're not allowed to swap out. Although maybe yechlu machlas connected machlat, umarcheshes connected marcheshes, salolu valolu masayim kotim. Maybe if there's multiple menachos being brought that are all of the same type, maybe we would be able to say, you keep those and I'll keep these. Inami masayim rachim, or they're both rachim, they're all the same type. Talmud Loimer, vachareva. And again it says, l'chol b'nei aharon tia. Even from mincha to mincha, from the same type of mincha to the same type of mincha, you can't swap it out. Yochol lo yechlechu b'kodesh hakadosh. Maybe we only don't allow swapping if it's a carbon that's classified as kodesh kodeshim, of which a mincha and an oif are all part of that category. Avo yechlechu b'kodeshim kalam. But maybe if there's a question of eating the basar toida or eating the basar shlomim, which are kodeshim kalam, maybe we would allow this swapping. Talmud Leimer ish ka'achiv. So now we're already bringing a different pasuk. It says in Maltoida Yakrivenu, which is of course a kodeshim kalam. Vehikruv al zevach hatoida chalas matas pelulus b'shemen u'rekike matas meshuchah b'shemen, and then it says, I'm sorry, I didn't say good. Right before the pasuk of Toida, it says ish ka'achiv, which was the pasuk of Mincha, which taught us that you cannot swap karbonos. And directly after that, the next pasuk, or two pasukim later, is Imal Toida Yakrivenu, which tells us that all that you discussed till now, all that we just discussed until now, that there's no swapping of karbonos, it also applies to Imal Toida Yakrivenu, to carbon Toida, which is Kodeshim Kalam. So it says Ishkacha v'samach le Imal Toida. And therefore, we learn from here, Kishem shein cholkim b'kotche kodshim, kach ein cholkim b'kotshim kalam. Ish, what do we learn from Ish? Because it says Ish ke'achav, ka'achiv, zokt the Gemara, Ish cholik, afilu balmum, ve'in akotin cholik, afilu tam. A kohen who's a balmum has a right to enjoy part of the carbon. He gets a chelik. And he doesn't do anything, he does. The Bali Mum and Kohanim would work in the Beis HaMikdash, and what they would do, they would inspect the wood for rot and worms, and they would cut it out. But a cotton, vafilu tam, even if a cotton is a tam, he has no mum and he's perfect, he still will not be able to partake in the carbon. So now we quoted a long price. Who is the author of this price? Zokt Gemara, Stam Safra, Safra is Tarish Kahanim, which are the brises related to carbonos, which this brise that we just learned is, who is the normal author? Rabbi Yudi. V'hu ka'amar, the less beidin chaluka klal. And he is the one who said that we can't swap anything. So if we can't swap anything, I can't give my meat away for Kiddushin either. If I can't even swap my meat for your meat, I surely cannot swap my meat for your Kiddushin. So you see clearly, Shmami know that Rabbi Yehuda retracted from his opinion that you could be mekadosh a woman of kochim, and he holds rather that you cannot, which supports Rabbi Yochanan, who said that at the end of the day, everybody agreed that you cannot use kochim for Kiddushin. Omarava, Ucharav Milay Tanya, do we not have a brisa that supports Rav, meaning that Rabbi Yehuda still maintains his position that you could be mekadosh with kochim? But Tanya, we learned, when it came to lechem aponim, Rashi tells us they were not, at the end, the beginning, there's a lot of siman bracha in the lechem aponim that every kohen got a part of, so there was plenty for everybody. And if we look at Rashi, which is the first wide line, Gabi lechem aponim Tanya, Arboim Shona Shashime Shimon Atzadik the 40 years that Shimon Tzadik was a Kohen Gadol, and this is in the second base of Mikdash, Nishtacha bracha b'lechem aponim. There was a bracha in the lechem aponim. The Chalkoyin Hamagia Kazayis. Every Kohen who got a Kazayis. Yesh Oichel v'Sava. Yesh Oichel u'Meiser. That little Kazayis was enough to completely satisfy somebody, maybe even too much. That's what a bracha there was. But Mikam Ve'elach, after the reign of Shimon HaTzadik, Nishtachem E'era b'lechem aponim. The lechem aponim now is not so gebed, and therefore they got a tiny little piece, and it didn't satisfy them. The Chalkoyin Hamagia Kipul, he got not a Kazayis, but a tiny little amount. That's Tnuin Moish Knidei Mimenu. The Tnuin, the Erlich Ha'ed L'Kayim said, you know what? I'm not even going to take lechem aponim. Because it didn't impact them. And because of that, the Gargaranim, the Chazerim, the finessers, Cholkin, they would grab. Because what does it mean, Cholkin? The high Cholkin, Lav Lita Chelka Hamagia Kamar. It doesn't just mean he'll take his part, because as we said, that's barely anything. Kivin in the by Me'era, Kipul, Lamachosi, exactly what he's going to put a crumb into his mouth. So what they did was, Elacholkin Derech Eloi. What does that mean? They would swap. Mania Chelka Lechaveroi, the Noidel connected by Machamacher. One kind will say, I'll give you my chelik in lechem aponim. So if enough people gave their chelik to one coin, at least he would get a nice piece. And then, in lieu of that, the coin will give you can have my shlomim tomorrow, and you could have the chatos. So they swapped out. So you see clearly from this brisa, Alma Isbuhu din Chaluka. You see that there was a din Chaluka. That means they swapped out Kachim. The Al Korcha Chal Rabbi Yehudi. This brisa also has to be Rabbi Yehudi, Damar Mamoinu, because he says it's his mom, and it's surely not Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Yosy. So that was the Gemara's right. So Zoktei, the Gemara, you have a right to Rab. You see that Rabbi Yehuda must have maintained his position because it says it's Nun Moshe Shadei Bagaradim Cholkin, and for the Gemara, my Cholkin Choitfin. It doesn't mean they swap. They can't swap. It means they just grab more than their share. Kedekatani Seifa. Ma'ase be'echad shechot av chelkoi vechelak haveri. He chapped his chelik and his friend's chelik. But you can't say ben chamten ajoy moisoi. He was called a ben chamten, and we'll see the Gemara being psukim that chamten means someone who takes what he shouldn't. If he takes what's not his. Amar Rabbi Bar Shila, my car. Where do you see in the pasuk what chamten means? It says lekai paltenu miyad Russia, save me, protect me from the Russia. Miyad ma'avel v'chaymitz. Ma'avel v'chaymitz rab. For someone who does avos and needs a chaymitz rab, he takes away, steals things from me. I'm sorry, v'chaymitz. I apologize. I read it like a Chinaman. V'chaymitz, period. So that's also someone who's violating you, stealing your stuff. Rabbi Omar Mehach. Rabbi says I have another makar that chaymitz means someone who steals. It says limdu heitev dirshu mishvat ashur chametz. Fix, rectify the genevis that are going on. So chametz is referring to a ganav. Gavaltic. So let's see how Rashi teaches the answer of the Gemara. Zok the Gemara, Umeshani lo'ilam ein boy din chaluka. 5 lines down in the wide lines of Rashi. Umay chalkin. It doesn't mean they swapped, which would show that the Yehuda maintained his shita. Rather, umay chalkin chalka megia kamar. He took his own chelik. Ucheshe'enoi shavaloi, and if it's not enough, he would also grab his chaver's chelik. That's chelka hamagia kamar. That's the chelik that he's entitled to. That was still when there was a shas bracha. And here you see ishru chametz. The Navi was being instructed to hachziku yat hanigzal, help the nigzal latzilim yad oishkoi, to save him and protect him from the person who tried to steal from him. Okay, gewaltig. Okay. Zok the Heilige Gemara. So that's in Yeshaya about Asher Chametz. Fix up, protect those who are being assaulted and being stolen from. Okay, so now we've covered how we know that Basa Kochim you cannot do Kiddushin with. Now let's look at the next part of the Mishnah. Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni, the Mishnah says, Bein B'Shagig, Bein B'Mezid like Kiddush. That was the sheet of our mayor. Clearly, Rabbi Meir holds it's not his moment to make Kiddushin with. Rabbi Yehuda says it depends if it's Shegel or Mazid, which means Mammon Ma'aseh could be his money to make Kiddushin with, but there's exceptions. So Rabbi Yehuda is Shegel like Kiddush, Mazid Kiddush, and we'll have to get the reason for all this. Immediately, first of all, how do you know, according to Rabbi Meir, that Ma'aseh is not your money, cannot do a transaction with it, you cannot do a Kiddushin with it. Amar Rab Acha Barei de Rabba Mishmei de Gemara. Mishmei de Gemara means that's what the Olam used to say. Kach nikva the Gemara or Shukura befi b'nei bes medrash. That was the common understanding by everybody. So the Gemara, it says in the pasuk as follows: V'chol ma'aser aretz mizera aretz mipriya h lashem hu lashem hu kodesh lashem. So the pasuk refers to ma'aser as kodesh lashem. Lashem hu. So we dash lashem hu. It belongs to the Rebbeinu Shloim for us to eat only v'loy lekadish boy isha. So you have a pasuk that tells you ma'aser lashemu. It's not something that you can use for your own things, such as to be mekadosh a lady. Frek to Gemara, are you telling me whenever it says like lashemu by something, it's telling you that thing cannot be used to be mekadosh a lady? All right, trumas ma'aser. What about trumas ma'aser? Dichsiv kain terimu gamatem trumas Hashem. So Trumas Meiser is also referred to as Trumas Hashem, yet you could use that for Kiddushin. Utnam Amekalish Petruma Mikudeshes. So to Gemara, you know why? The likes of Be Lashem. It says Trumas Hashem. It doesn't say Truma Lashem. If it's Lashem, then it means you can't use it for your person. Lashem doesn't mean that. I Varechala, which is also a version of Truma. Titnu Lashem. So there it does say Lashem. Nevertheless, we learned that Tana Mekalish Petruma is Mikudeshes. So tomorrow, like Sid, they Kodesh. By Ma'aser, it says Kodesh Lashem. Stam saying Lashem does not mean that you can't make Kiddushin with it. Okay, Barei Shvius, what about Perish of Shemitah? T'chsiv Yovel Hu Kodesh Tia Lachem. There it says Kodesh. Utnana Makdish Perish Shvius Mikudeshes. So tomorrow, like Sid, by Lashem. It has Kodesh, it doesn't have Lashem, and it has to say Kodesh Lashem. And that you only find by Meiser. What about Truma? This is Kodesh Yisrael Lashem Reishish Tuvosai, which is saying the Klal Yisrael is Kodesh to the Rebbeinu Shloim like Truma. Utanana Mekadosh B'Truma Kodeshes. Dr. Merka, who be Yisrael said the Kodesh is Yisrael Lashem. It's saying that Yisrael is Kodesh, not the Truma. But straight to Gemara, that pasuk B'nei Ubei is comparing us to Truma. We're Kodesh Lashem like Truma. So don't we see automatically, since we're Kodesh Lashem and we're compared to Truma, so by Truma it also says Kodesh Lashem. So Gemara, you're right. Because of that, we have to abort the whole thing. How do we know Dafka by Meiser? It's not your mamoy and not anything else. Tigamaravin Sabo Kamedarav Omerkrahu Bav Yosy. By Meiser, it says who. It doesn't say who anywhere else. It only says Meiser by who. It only says who. Excuse me, by Meiser. And we learn that Bav Yosy 8 remains with its Kedushas Meiser. And therefore, you cannot use it for anything personal. Nowhere else does it say who. And therefore, it's only by Meiser where Reb Meir has a makar that it's not your mammon and you cannot make Kedusha with. Uvehektish b'mezid kiddush b'shogeg lakiddush. If you have mammon hektish, if he was makadosh or b'mezid, knowing what he was doing, then it's a good Kedushin. B'shogeg lakiddush, divrei Reb Meir. Reb Yehuda said exactly the opposite. B'shogeg kiddush b'mezid lakiddush. So Zok the Gemara, Rabbi Yaakov, Shamis Minei Rabbi Yochanan Tarti. I heard from Rabbi Yochanan an explanation of two halachas. The first halacha was Shiglagas Meiser Rabbi Yehuda. If you look back in the Mishnah, puzzlingly enough, Rabbi Yehuda said by Meiser, although Rabbi Meir says Bein Shogeg Bein Mezid Lo Kiddush, although that's what Rabbi Meir said, Rabbi Yehuda said B'Shogeg Lo Kiddush B'Mezid Kiddush. And we're puzzled if Ma'aseh you can be Kaddish with, what's the difference if it was Shogeg or if it was Mezid? So I heard from Rabbi Yochanan an explanation for why Rabbi Yehuda holds Shiglagas Meiser would not work. Rabbi Yaakov heard this from Rabbi Yochanan, I heard Shigel is Ma'aser de Yehuda, and Shigel is Hektish to Reb Meir, and why by Shoyig by Hektish did Reb Meir say it won't work? Shneim ein Isha miskadeshes beh. Neither one works for Kiddushin, right? The Yehuda says Shoyig by Ma'aser doesn't work, and Reb Meir says Shoyig by Kachim doesn't work. So I heard the reason. I heard two reasons, and I don't know which reason applies to which Allah. So reason number one that I heard is Chada levisha ein Isha roitza. It's because the woman wouldn't accept this Kiddushin. The Chada, and the other reason I heard was levisha ein shneim roitza. Neither one wants this Kiddushin to work. But v'lo yadana haiminayu. But I don't know which reason applies to Rabbi Yehuda saying Ma'aser Shoyig doesn't work, and I don't know which reason applies to Rabbi Meir who says Kachim Shoyig doesn't work. So Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah said, Nechsi. Let's see if we can figure it out. Ma'aser, the swear by Ma'aser, Ihi lo nichala. She for sure doesn't want to accept Mois Ma'aser as her Kiddushin, Mishum Teicha Dorcha. She's going to have to, she can't even use this money here. She's going to have to schlep to Yerushalayim to eat this money. She doesn't want that. So that's why it's not a good Kiddushin. But he doesn't care if she has to schlep. He's happy. He's been calling a woman with Ma'aser. He doesn't even have to give cash. Ela hektish, but hektish tavayel nichlu. They are neither one would want. The nischel hektish al yudayu. We know that when you're moil behektish, when you use hektish for your own personal things, the hektish goes lechulin, because that's what happens by the milah. You violate the hektish, and the hektish becomes chulin. Nobody wants that to happen on their account. So that's how Rabbi Yirmiyah understood Rabbi Yochanan, that nobody wants it by Kiddushin, by hektish, and only the wife doesn't want to accept it by Ma'aser. But Rabbi Yaakov Omar Mistafer, he said it's exactly the opposite. Mila ikala meimar I Ma'aser, she doesn't want because of tircha dorcha, which we said Rabbi Yirmiyah agreed to as well. But you also he doesn't want her. And there's two pshatim in Rashi. Either it means it discounts the value of the Ma'aser. The fact that somebody could only use the line, that discounts its value. So he doesn't want to take a loss on the value. That's number one. And number two, he doesn't want his wife to have to now risk traveling. It's not safe. It's not so good for women to travel. And therefore, he wouldn't want to be Mekadesher with Ma'aser Shein. Ela hektish, I understand why she doesn't want to accept this as a Kiddushin. In this hektish al yidei, she's causing meila. Ela iu, but him, why does he care? Mina nichala de nikna itzah meila. He still has a great benefit. Otherwise, he'd have to go buy an expensive ring. Now he can use this hektish that he has, and it doesn't cost him anything at all. So those are the two versions of how to explain the machlokes in the Mishnah. But regardless, now we understand why there's a difference between Shoyig and Mezid. Because if he did Mezid, then we know this is what they want. If they're both aware of it, then they both accepted it. But if they didn't know that it was Ma'aser, or if they didn't know that it was hektish, then there might be a reason why they wouldn't have wanted it had they known. Beautiful. In the case of a Shoyig, we said the woman wouldn't have wanted, and therefore the Kiddushin doesn't work. But will the money go l'chulin because he attempted to be Mekadesher with this money? Amar lei. So Reb Chisda answered, your shayla doesn't make sense. Isha ein miskadeshes. If the chalois doesn't happen, which means that the swap of the money for the Kiddushin did not occur, so mois hey chiyetzi l'chulin. How could you suggest that the mois was yetzi l'chulin? In fact, the mois remains kodesh because you were not moil because the transaction is null and void. Boy minei Reb Chia bar Avin Reb Chisda b'mecher mai. What would happen? Not in a case of Kiddushin, but in the case where I was purchasing something with this money. So Rashi says, Lokach hachevet b'mois hektish. You bought an object, an item with the money of hektish, but b'shogeg. You did it unknowing that it was hektish. L'Reb Meir kana oiloik. According to Reb Meir, would it be kana or not? Because what did Reb Meir say by shogeg, by hektish, l'gabe Kiddushin? So L'Gabe Kiddushin, it says, Reb Meir holds the amazing Kiddush b'Shogeg like Kiddush. Why? Because we say she or both of them don't want. Well, what about by a mecher? Zok to Gemara, Omer Loi. So Reb Chisda answered back, Af b'mecher Loi Kana. Just like by Kiddushin, someone wouldn't have wanted this transaction. So too by mecher, we say this woman would not have wanted this transaction. Let's see Rashi. Loi Kana, v'lo yatzu mois l'chulin. The mois doesn't go to l'chulin because there's no transaction here. Ve'ein mila l'Reb Meir, and they would not. So the question is, we always know what's the classic case of mila, where someone didn't know that this was mois hektish, and then they went and bought something with it. But now that we're saying Reb Meir holds that wouldn't work, there would be no transaction, and there wouldn't be meila. So how could you make meila? Zok to Gemara, Zok Rashi, I mean, ben mila Reb Meir bekteshes alaba oichel oichlei hektish. You'd have to eat something that belonged to hektish. You'd have to actually consume something. You wouldn't be able to have meila. Why? Because you never discharge it. Since we say that you wouldn't have wanted the transaction had you known till the transaction is null and void, so there's no transaction. So there was no meila. And we know meila only works b'shogeg. The meiz don't want to work. So if you knew about it and you wanted to do anyway, yes, maybe the transaction would be chal, but that's not meila. Meila is only b'shogeg, and you can. And Reb Meir is saying if you did the transaction b'shogeg, the transaction would be null and void. So the only way to be over meila is by eating something of hektish b'shogeg. Gewaltig. Eisei the Gemara has a kasha. Chanim nika balabayis. The halacha is sometimes when the balabayis gives money to a supplier, he expects that money to remain as is, not to be touched, his money. And sometimes it's expected that the merchant's going to use that money. He don't just owe you. He'll have a tab with it. So the halacha is, if the gizbar gives money to a shulchani is a bank. He takes in money, he gives out money, he changes money. There it's assumed, when the gizbar gave it to the shulchani, it's assumed the shulchani is going to use that money. And therefore, the shulchani has a right to use that money. And if it was mois hektish that the gizbar gave him, the gizbar is going to be mois. But on the other hand, if the gizbar gave money to a balabais to hold, there it's assumed that the balabais is going to keep that same little package of money locked up, protected, and is not going to use it. Therefore, if the balabais uses it, the balabais will be mois. What if you gave it to a storekeeper? So he's not just a money changer; he's a regular store. He sells products. Is the assumption that the chenevni is going to hold on to that same money in a package and hold it for you, like a balabayis, and therefore, if he uses it, he will be moil? Or is the assumption that he's going to spend it, and therefore, the gizbar should be moil? So the Brisa says, chenevni k'balabayis. When the gizbar gives money to a chenevni, that money is to remain the way it is, and it's not supposed to be used, and if it's used, then the chenevni will be moil. The Reb Meir, Rabbi Yehuda Aimer chenevni k'shoch. Yehuda says, no, a chenevni, it's expected if you give a chenevni money to pay your tab, it's expected that he's going to use that money and give you credit in something else. And therefore, the gizbar would do. So, atkan like kamifligi, el gemarsar v'chenevni k'shochani, umarsar v'chenevni k'balabayis. The whole question is, if they have a status of a shulchani or balabayis. But everybody agrees that Mila works here. But everybody agrees that if the money was used, there's a meila here, either on behalf of the gizbar or on behalf of the chenevni or on behalf of the balabayis. So, according to Reb Meir, if it's shaking, the transaction wouldn't go through at all. So, how is this possible according to Reb Meir? Reb Meir's argument when he said that chenevni balabayis, according to him, it's not relevant. There's no meila here at all. He's just arguing with Rabbi Yehuda. Lididi im haitzi nami lema. According to me, b'shaygig, there is no meila at all because the transaction is null and void, as we discussed. El lidach, according to you, Rabbi Yehuda, who holds the transaction is an active transaction. According to you, at least agree to me, the chenevni kabalabayis, and rather than the gizbar being moil, let's say the chenevni is moil. And to that, Rabbi responded, like, I disagree with you. It's expected that when you give a chenevni money, he's going to use it, and therefore when the gizbar gave the chenevni money, it's the gizbar that was moil. Okay, Gavaltik, Baruch Hashem, we were Zoiche to finish the daf. We'll stop here and we will be Mamshech Be'ez Hashem tomorrow. Tomorrow we're learning a little bit earlier. We're learning at 5:30 because davening is earlier. Because tomorrow is Hoshana Rabbah. We should all be Zoiche to Hoshana Toiva Musuka, Hoshana Bracha Vatzlacha, Beruchnis of the Gashmis. The Rebbe should give us a shefa, a huge overflowing amount of good hashboyis, sign ruchnis and sign gashmis. We should have a beautiful year of health, of happiness, of simchas, of Yiddish anachas, of parnasa b'revach, and a year we will be able to greet Mashiach. Sheyaveh b'mher v'yamin.